It began as a whisper, a faint hum on the edge of human detection. At first, Earth's most advanced telescopes and radio arrays dismissed it as cosmic background noise, just another anomaly in the vast silence of space. But Dr. Eleanor Gray, director of the Earth Space Command's Quantum Signal Analysis Division, wasn't so easily satisfied. For weeks, she'd been studying the signal that no one else seemed to notice, a pulsing frequency that seemed too deliberate, too precise to be random. Her team worked day and night, scouring the data, running simulations, and cross-referencing with every known signal, known species, and galactic frequency. Nothing matched. This was not a signal from a star or a black hole or any natural phenomenon. It was something else, something ancient, something intelligent. "Doctor," said a voice behind her, drawing her from her thoughts. "We've cross-referenced the signal against every known catalog in the galaxy. This isn't a regular transmission. It's coded." Dr. Gray turned to see her lead technician, Miles Tessa, his face pale under the harsh artificial lights. His eyes were wide with the sort of realization that comes only when you discover something you weren't meant to. "How long until we can decode it?" she asked, already bracing for what was coming next. "We've already started decoding, but we need more time. It's layered. Multiple frequencies, nested codes." Miles cut himself off, his gaze flickering to the screen. His fingers trembled as he typed in the final sequence. The data on the screen shifted. The static began to resolve, first into shapes, then into words, then into a pattern. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat as the message appeared on the screen. "The CYTLE begins. Awake." For a moment, there was silence. Then, as if the universe itself was watching, the signal flared, brighter, stronger. The transmission wasn't just a message, it was a call. A call that, once answered, could never be undone. Dr. Gray's heart hammered in her chest. "We've triggered it," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else in the room. The signal had been dormant for eons, waiting, and now it was alive. She didn't know what it meant, or what would come next. But she understood one thing: humanity had just made first contact. Before she could say more, the room darkened. Power fluctuated. The screen crackled with static, then exploded with a surge of energy, knocking everyone off their feet. Panic spread through the lab as alarms blared, and the emergency lights flickered to life. Miles scrambled to his feet. "Dr. Gray, we've lost all external communications. The signal is." The room shook with the force of a shockwave. The ground trembled beneath them as a deep, low rumble vibrated through the walls. Eleanor's mind raced. She had always known that unlocking the secrets of the universe would come with consequences, but she hadn't prepared for this. "Get to the surface. Now," she shouted, already moving toward the door. The security lockdown protocols had activated, but she needed to see the sky. Something was coming. Something enormous. Outside the observation windows, the night sky shifted. Stars seemed to flicker, as though they were being erased. A streak of light, no, a wave of light, shot across the sky, stretching across the horizon like the path of an incoming storm. Then, without warning, the first harbinger appeared. A colossal, incomprehensible shadow appeared in the heavens, a shape that defied physics, with a surface that seemed to pulse with ancient energy. It was unlike anything humanity had ever imagined, and it was heading directly toward Earth. And with it, the truth became undeniable. The universe had noticed humanity, and it was coming to collect its due. The city's skyline shimmered under the eerie glow of the harbinger's arrival. Across the globe, a wave of panic spread faster than any communication could keep up with. Satellites had captured the shadow in the sky, but it didn't make sense. The object was too vast, too alien. Every military defense network on Earth scrambled to respond, but it was already clear. Whatever had appeared above was far beyond anything humanity had encountered. Dr. Eleanor Gray stood in the Earth Space Command's war room, watching the chaos unfold on a dozen screens. Her pulse raced, and her mind struggled to keep up with the overwhelming data pouring in. The Harbinger's arrival had sent an electromagnetic pulse cascading across the planet, rendering all global communication systems useless. No one knew what to do, and the few military satellites still operational had confirmed what she feared most. The Harbinger was not a ship or a weapon. It was alive. "We're not ready for this," murmured General Thorne, his voice heavy with disbelief. "We don't even know what it wants, let alone how to fight it." Eleanor's eyes remained glued to the screens, watching the strange being flicker and pulse in the atmosphere. It didn't move like any spacecraft she ever studied. It seemed more like an immense, fluctuating energy field, rippling through space with no clear structure. Its surface was like black glass, and from it emanated a low, almost imperceptible hum, like the beat of a heart far too large to understand. And worst of all, there was no indication that it was interested in diplomacy or peaceful communication. It was a predator, and humanity had just been marked as its prey. "They've begun their descent," came the voice of Commander Hale, a seasoned veteran of the space program. "Whatever this thing is, it's sending smaller ships to the surface." The data confirmed his statement. Multiple smaller crafts, each with a form that seemed to warp and twist through space, began breaking off from the larger Harbinger. They were fast, incomprehensibly so, leaving trails of distortion in their wake. Humanity's defenses were almost entirely obsolete against such technology. "We have to do something, Dr. Gray," General Thorne said, his tone sharp with urgency. "We can't just sit here and wait to be annihilated." Eleanor's mind worked quickly, but the answers eluded her. She knew that the signal they had activated was somehow connected to this threat, but she hadn't yet figured out how to reverse it, or even what the Harbingers truly were. All she could do was watch as Earth's most advanced weaponry launched into the air, attempting to defend cities that had already been reduced to trembling ruins by the Harbinger's advance. The first battle took place over New York City. The Harbinger ships moved with uncanny precision, dodging human missile strikes effortlessly, as though their very presence was manipulating the laws of physics. The human fighter jets had no chance. Within minutes, the military forces were decimated. The explosions that rippled through the city were nothing compared to the silence that followed. It wasn't a victory for the Harbingers. It was a statement. They were here, and they could annihilate humanity at will. I can't believe this," a voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence in the war room. It was Lieutenant Vargas, who had been stationed aboard the Earth's largest orbital defense platform. "We've tried everything. Nothing works. They're too powerful." Eleanor closed her eyes, her stomach sinking. The Harbingers didn't seem interested in negotiation or even in conquest in the traditional sense. They weren't here to enslave humanity. They were here to erase it, to prevent Earth from becoming the next species to unlock the primordial power that the signal represented. The harsh truth settled over her like a weight. Humanity was not prepared for this. Their military might, their technology, and their ingenuity, all of it had been shattered in the blink of an eye. They had provoked something far older, far more powerful than they could ever hope to understand. "We have to get to the signal," Dr. Gray whispered, more to herself than anyone in the room. "There must be a way to control it, to reverse this." But deep down, Eleanor knew the reality. Humanity's survival was no longer certain. And the Harbingers had only just begun. As the Harbingers ravaged Earth, humanity was pushed to the brink. The first battles had been a devastating failure, and the survivors found themselves scrambling for any hope of resistance. The most advanced military forces had been decimated, cities lay in ruins, and the communications blackout had isolated Earth from the rest of the galaxy. But Dr. Eleanor Gray, despite the mounting chaos, had an idea that flickered with a dangerous promise. The primordial signal they had accidentally triggered was still active. She could feel it in her bones. The signal had been designed to awaken something within humanity, something ancient and dormant. It wasn't just a beacon. It was a catalyst, a means to elevate those who were worthy of its power. "Dr. Gray," said Commander Hale, his voice laced with both desperation and awe, "we've re-established limited communication with some of our scattered defense bases. We've been able to restart some of the quantum signal arrays in a few locations. Are you saying you want to use it again?" Eleanor nodded, her face grim but determined. "Yes, we can't fight them with conventional weapons. We need to awaken the signal's true power. It's the only way we stand a chance." The idea was radical, even dangerous. The signal had already proven to be volatile, and using it could destabilize their fragile minds and bodies. Still, it was their only hope. She had always known humanity's greatest strength was adaptability, and if the signal could transform them, if it could unlock hidden potential within the human race, then perhaps they could challenge the Harbingers on an entirely different level. The first test came at a military outpost in the remnants of what was once the Pacific coast. The team was small, only a handful of soldiers and scientists, but the risks were enormous. Dr. Gray and her top engineers had spent days preparing. They connected a makeshift resonance chamber, carefully attuned to the signal's frequency, to the outpost's emergency systems. As the chamber powered up, the resonance began to hum, low and subtle at first, then escalating in intensity. The soldiers and engineers who volunteered to be the first to test the technology braced themselves, their bodies tense with anticipation. Eleanor watched them, feeling a mix of fear and hope. If this worked, it would change everything. The chamber pulsed. A wave of energy washed over the volunteers. At first, nothing happened. The air was thick with tension, but there was no explosion, no dramatic shift in the fabric of reality. Then, suddenly, one of the soldiers, Private Juno, began to tremble. Her eyes snapped open, wide with shock. I can hear them," she gasped, her voice cracking. "I can hear everything." The others turned, staring as Juno staggered back, her hands pressed against her temples. Then, with a burst of unnatural speed, she bolted forward. The speed was impossible, beyond any human limit. She collided with a metal wall, and instead of crumpling, she pushed right through it as though the steel was paper. "Private Juno," Dr. Gray shouted. "Stay focused." Juno's voice echoed back, but it wasn't the same. Her tone was unnaturally calm, almost serene. "I can feel it. The signal. It's all around us. We're not just hearing it. We are it now." Eleanor's heart raced as she watched the volunteers struggle to control their newfound abilities. Some exhibited enhanced strength, others gained telepathic abilities, and one soldier, Sergeant Ellis, was able to manipulate the air itself, creating gusts of wind powerful enough to tear through the outpost. It was working. But as the power coursed through their veins, the soldiers' expressions began to shift. There was a flicker of discomfort in their eyes, a growing unease. The signal was far more than a tool for enhancement. It was a force that toyed with the very fabric of their consciousness. Their minds expanded, but the strain was evident. They were changing, evolving, but at what cost? Juno, who had been the first to feel the signal's pull, collapsed to her knees, her face contorted in pain. It's too much," she gasped. "We can't control it. It's us now." The chamber's energy faltered, flickering as the soldiers' bodies and minds began to stretch beyond their limits. Dr. Gray quickly signaled to shut the system down, her heart pounding in her chest. The chamber powered down, the pulse of energy dissipating. The soldiers collapsed, their powers fading as quickly as they had manifested. "Is anyone hurt?" Dr. Gray asked urgently, rushing to their side. Juno, still gasping for breath, managed a weak smile. "We're not the same anymore, Dr. Gray. But we're not dead." The soldiers who had volunteered were alive, but barely. Their bodies were bruised, their minds unstable. The signal's power was undeniable, but it was clear that it came at a price. The question remained, Could humanity harness this power without losing everything that made them human? Eleanor stood silently, the weight of their first experiment hanging over her. The stakes had just been raised. They had awakened something ancient within themselves, but now the real challenge began, controlling it and using it to fight the Harbingers. But as the dust settled and the survivors began to regain their bearings, one thing became painfully clear. Humanity's struggle was only beginning, and the line between salvation and destruction was razor thin. The signal had given them power, but it had also unleashed something darker, something they weren't fully prepared to understand. The power of the primordial signal surged through humanity, like a wave crashing against the shores of their consciousness. The soldiers who had survived the first experiment had become something new, something both awe-inspiring and terrifying. They were no longer just human. They were the first of the symphonists, the chosen few who had transcended the limits of biology and evolved into conduits for the signal's vast energy. As the days passed, more and more people sought to join the ranks of the symphonists. Across the globe, underground movements began to form, each group eager to access the power of the signal. Some were soldiers, others were civilians, scientists, or even politicians, each desperate to unlock the potential hidden within themselves. With every experiment, humanity pushed further into the unknown, reshaping itself into something alien, even divine. Dr. Eleanor Gray and her core team of scientists worked tirelessly to refine the technology, building new resonance chambers, tweaking frequencies, and learning how to better control the flow of power. They knew they were on the precipice of something unprecedented, but with every success came a new cost. The first few symphonists had displayed remarkable abilities: telekinesis, superhuman strength, enhanced cognitive processing, and even control over the elements. But as more people underwent the procedure, the effects began to change. Some of the new symphonists had gained abilities that were far more destructive, uncontrollable bursts of energy that left entire neighborhoods in ruin. Others found that their minds fractured under the weight of the signal, losing their sense of self, becoming mere husks of their former selves, their bodies still moving but no longer human. Eleanor stood in a newly constructed lab beneath a fortified military installation, watching one of the latest recruits struggle to control his newfound power. Private Lucas had been one of the volunteers who had undergone the procedure just days earlier. His body crackled with static energy, his skin shimmering with an ethereal glow. He was trying to lift a metal slab with his mind, but the air around him trembled with unspent energy, like a live wire too close to the ground. "Focus, Lucas," Eleanor commanded, her voice tight with both concern and determination. "You have to control it. Don't let it control you." But Lucas's eyes were wide with terror. The energy was too much. It pushed against his mind, a tidal wave of raw power that he couldn't hope to contain. His hand spasmed, and the air around him erupted with an explosive surge of power. The metal slab flew from its place, tearing through the reinforced walls like paper. The shockwave sent everyone in the room crashing to the floor. Eleanor scrambled to her feet, her heart racing. The symphonists were becoming unpredictable, dangerous. The power they sought to wield was like a double-edged sword, offering both salvation and annihilation in equal measure. "Shut it down," shouted Commander Hale, rushing forward to help stabilize Lucas. The team rushed to pull the plug on the equipment, but it was already too late. The surge of energy had knocked out all the external power systems, sending the installation into darkness. "Is anyone hurt?" Eleanor asked, trying to steady herself. She felt a growing sense of dread. How long could they keep pushing forward with this? Lucas groaned, his body twitching involuntarily. I can't control it. Dr. Gray." His voice was strained, his once clear eyes now clouded with panic. Eleanor knelt beside him, her mind racing. "This isn't just about control anymore," she murmured, more to herself than anyone. "We've awakened something inside us, but it's unstable. We're not ready." Outside the lab, The sounds of increasing unrest filled the air. Reports had started coming in from around the world. New symphonists were emerging by the hundreds, but so were incidents of uncontrollable chaos. The symphonists weren't just powerful, they were beginning to fracture, to break down into factions. The signal was not just a tool for uniting humanity. It was dividing it. "We need to act," Hale said, his face taut with concern. The symphonists could become more of a threat than the harbingers at this rate. Eleanor's mind raced. She knew Hale was right. If humanity could not control the power they had unlocked, the very force they had hoped would save them could destroy them from within. They had reached a tipping point. Meanwhile, across the globe, a new leader was rising among the symphonists. Dorian Holt, a charismatic former military commander, had become the most powerful and influential of the new breed of humans. He had mastered the power of the signal with chilling ease, and his vision was simple: transcendence. To Dorian, the symphonists were not just humanity's future, they were its new rulers, destined to reshape the galaxy in their image. He had already begun to rally the growing symphonist factions, urging them to abandon their human pasts and ascend to their new purpose. His message spread like wildfire, captivating those desperate for a sense of power, for control, for a way to escape the devastation caused by the harbingers. They saw in him a savior, a leader who could guide them to godhood. But for Eleanor, the rise of Dorian Holt meant something darker. He was not just a savior, he was a threat, and the power of the symphonists, unchecked, could become a force as destructive as the harbingers themselves. The war for the future of humanity had just begun, and the line between salvation and tyranny was growing ever thinner. The chaos that followed the rise of the symphonists was unlike anything the world had ever seen. What had begun as an effort to harness a new form of power for survival now threatened to tear humanity apart. Across the globe, Dorian Holt's influence spread like wildfire. His charisma, coupled with the unmatched abilities of the symphonists, drew thousands to his cause. To them, he was more than a leader. He was a symbol of a new age, an age where humanity would be reborn as gods. But Dr. Eleanor Gray knew better. Holt's vision, while seemingly noble, was flawed and dangerously authoritarian. Under his banner, the symphonists had begun to form a ruthless new hierarchy, casting aside those who didn't share their enhanced abilities. The once promising evolution of humanity had turned into a force that would not hesitate to crush those deemed lesser. In her isolated laboratory, Eleanor pored over the data from their experiments. Despite the growing conflict outside, her mind was consumed with one question: how could humanity reclaim control of the power they had unleashed? Holt's growing faction was becoming too powerful, and the harbingers were still looming, their ominous presence above Earth a constant reminder of the stakes. A sudden crackling sound interrupted her thoughts. A transmission, encrypted and fragile, popped up on the lab's display screen. It was from a rogue symphonist faction, a group that had rejected Holt's growing tyranny and sought to preserve what was left of humanity's free will. "Dr. Gray," the message began, "we have a solution, but it comes at a price. Meet us at the abandoned facility in the Siberian tundra. We can stop Dorian Holt, but we need your help." The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving Eleanor staring at the blank screen, her pulse quickening. She had no choice. She couldn't let Dorian Holt become the leader of this new age. The stakes were too high. Earth was caught between the overwhelming might of the harbingers and the oppressive, internal threat of the symphonists. If she could bring down Holt and restore the balance, perhaps humanity had a chance of surviving both. She turned to Commander Hale, who had been working beside her. His face was grim, eyes shadowed by the weight of the conflict. "Dorian Holt must be stopped," she said, her voice firm. "He's become a tyrant. If we let him rise, we lose everything." Hale nodded, his expression hardened by years of military command. "What do you need from me?" "We need the rogue symphonists' help," Eleanor explained, her eyes sharp. "They're the only ones who understand the technology I've been working on. If they're right, we can use the signal to shut down Holt's influence, but it will take a lot of resources and time. Time we don't have. The decision was made. The risk was colossal, but it was the only path forward. Eleanor and Hale would travel to Siberia, where the rogue symphonists waited. If the plan succeeded, they could disable the resonance chambers Holt had been using to fuel his growing army. But if they failed, it would mean the end of humanity's free will. The journey was treacherous. As they flew toward the Siberian facility, Eleanor's mind was torn between hope and fear. The rogue faction's message had been cryptic, offering only fragments of the plan. They couldn't know for certain whether it would work or whether it would make the situation worse. Meanwhile, back at Holt's stronghold, the symphonists were preparing for a confrontation of their own. Dorian had become aware of the rogue faction's defection and had begun to tighten his grip. The once celebrated promise of ascension had turned into something darker. The symphonists under Holt's banner now saw themselves as the arbiters of humanity's future, and they were ready to eliminate any who stood in their way. Prepare for war. Holt's cold voice echoed through the halls of his fortress, his power growing as the signal surged within him. The traitors will be crushed, and once the last of them falls, the earth will bow to the new order. Humanity will transcend. Eleanor's heart sank. Holt was no longer the man she had hoped would lead them. He was now a figure of tyranny, a puppet of the signal's destructive potential, and he would not stop until every last vestige of opposition was eradicated. But as the rogue symphonists awaited them in the tundra, Eleanor had one last hope. The signal could still be controlled. It had to be. If humanity was to survive this, it would have to rise above both the harbingers and their own darker impulses. The question remained, could humanity overcome its own creation, or would they become the very thing they feared? The Siberian tundra was a desolate place, winds howling through the icy wastelands, the earth cracked and barren beneath the weight of an endless winter. Eleanor, Hale, and their small team of scientists and soldiers trekked through the endless snow, their breath visible in the frigid air. The rogue symphonists had promised a way to counter Dorian Holt's growing control over the signal, but the journey to their hidden facility was perilous, with no guarantee that the solution they sought would be the one they needed. As they neared the facility, Eleanor could feel the signal pulsing beneath the frozen earth. The resonance chamber technology that had first unlocked humanity's potential was buried deep within the ice, hidden away from both the harbingers and the tyrants of their own kind. But the closer they got to the facility, the more she felt the signal's power surging, wild and uncontrollable, as though it were fighting against her presence. It was almost as if the signal itself could sense her intentions. "There it is," Hale said, pointing ahead. The lone structure, half buried in snow, rose in the distance. It was an old military facility, long abandoned by most, but now repurposed by the rogue symphonists. From the outside, it looked like nothing more than a crumbling outpost. But beneath the surface lay a vast network of underground chambers, each one filled with the kind of technology that had sparked humanity's transformation. Eleanor's thoughts raced as they approached the entrance, her hands trembling. She wasn't just here to stop Dorian Holt. She was here to control the very force that had turned the world upside down. The signal had promised power, but it was power that had corrupted humanity in ways they didn't understand. If they couldn't contain it, they might just bring about their own extinction. The doors to the facility creaked open, revealing the dim glow of emergency lights flickering weakly in the dark. The rogue symphonists were waiting for them, their faces shadowed, their eyes hollow from the toll the signal had taken on them. They were no longer the hopeful volunteers they once were. Instead, they were quiet, somber figures, scared by their own ambition. "Welcome," said one of them, a woman named Nadia, her voice soft but full of authority. "Dr. Gray, I assume you've come to stop Holt, but you've come for something else too, haven't you? To master the signal." Eleanor nodded. "We need to undo what's been done. Holt has twisted the power, used it to control and divide humanity. We need to stop him before we lose ourselves completely." Nadia's eyes darkened. "And you think the signal can be controlled? You've seen what it's done to those who've tried, including us." Elinor glanced at the rogue symphonists gathered around her. Their minds were shattered, their bodies no longer entirely human. The signal had consumed them. And yet, somehow, they had retained their awareness. There was no denying that it had changed them, forever. "But there's a chance, isn't there?" Elinor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A way to use the signal to take back control, to stop Holt's madness." Nadia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but it comes at a price. You'll need to go deeper into the facility. There's a device hidden in the central chamber, something we built before we knew the full consequences of what we were doing. It's an amplifier, a way to reverse the resonance of the signal. But activating it, it will require all of you who are connected to the signal to focus your abilities. If even one of you fails, the feedback could destroy everything." Elinor's heart skipped a beat. The risks were immense, but the alternative was even worse. Holt's faction was growing, and with every passing day, the harbingers hovered above, waiting for their moment to strike. Earth was on the edge of annihilation, both from within and without. She had no choice. "Then we do it," Elinor said, her voice hardening. "We'll use the amplifier, and we'll stop Holt. Together." The team made their way deeper into the facility, their footsteps echoing in the hollow chambers. The signal's presence was overwhelming now, like a heavy, invisible weight pressing on them from all sides. As they reached the central chamber, they saw the device, a massive, pulsating structure that seemed to hum with energy. It was both alien and familiar, its design far beyond anything humanity had created. Elinor stepped forward, her mind racing. She had no illusions about the dangers of what they were about to attempt. The amplifier could work, but it could also tear them apart, or worse, transform them into something even more terrifying than the symphonists had already become. Yet, in that moment, it was the only option. There was no turning back. "We need to synchronize," Nadia said, her voice low and steady. "If we can link our minds and channel our energy into the amplifier, we can reverse the signal's frequency. But be warned, it's going to hurt. If you're not ready, you won't survive." Elinor closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had spent years studying the signal, but now she was about to become part of it. The line between control and chaos was razor thin. "We're ready," she said quietly. The final test was about to begin. The central chamber was alive with energy, the hum of the amplifier reverberating through the walls like the beating heart of the facility. It was immense, almost alien in design, its surface covered with glowing symbols and geometric patterns that twisted and shifted with every passing second. The rogue symphonists stood in a tight circle around the device, their faces taut with concentration, their bodies trembling as the power of the signal coursed through them. Elinor stood at the edge of the circle, feeling the overwhelming force pushing against her mind. Every part of her screamed to resist, to run, but there was no time for fear. The future of humanity, of Earth itself, hung in the balance. She couldn't afford to falter now. "Are you ready?" Nadia asked, her voice steady but strained. Elinor nodded. "We don't have a choice." The rest of the team stood silently, each one focused, each one preparing to channel their energy into the amplifier. The rogue symphonists had already begun to sync their minds, and now it was their turn. Elinor closed her eyes, focusing on the rhythmic pulse of the signal beneath her skin. She could feel it, like a whisper in the back of her mind, calling her to surrender. It was the same power that had elevated humanity, and it was the same power that threatened to destroy them. It was both a blessing and a curse. "Now," Nadia said, her voice cutting through the tension in the air. The signal surge. Elinor felt the raw force slam into her chest like a tidal wave, sweeping through her body, tugging at the very core of her being. Her vision blurred, her thoughts scattered, but she forced herself to remain focused. She had to control it, had to push back against the chaos, or it would consume them all. One by one, the symphonists began to channel their abilities into the amplifier. The air crackled with energy, and the chamber seemed to pulse in rhythm with their thoughts. Eleanor's mind expanded, stretched beyond its normal limits, and she felt herself connect to the others, a shared consciousness forming as they synchronized their power. And then it happened. The amplifier, powered by their combined energy, roared to life. The air itself seemed to tremble, the very fabric of reality distorting around them. Eleanor's body shook violently as the signal surged to its peak. She could feel it, a massive wave of power building within the device, ready to explode, ready to tear apart everything in its path. "Focus," Nadia shouted, her voice distant but clear. "You have to hold it together. If we lose control now, it's over." Eleanor clung to her focus, her mind threading through the chaos like a needle through cloth. She could see flashes of light in her mind's eye, fragments of the future, images of the harbingers descending, of Holt's reign of terror, of a world burning beneath the weight of the signal's power. But she pushed it all away. There was only now, only the amplifier. Her heart raced as she reached out with her mind, feeling the energy in the chamber, pulling it into herself. It was raw, primal, but she could feel it shifting, adapting, responding to her touch. The frequencies were adjusting, realigning. Slowly, gradually, the amplifier began to hum a lower, more controlled tone. The signal was bending to her will, their will. And then, just as quickly, everything went wrong. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber, the sound of reality itself shattering. The amplifier began to sputter, its hum turning into a violent shriek. Eleanor's body spasmed as the energy snapped back, bucking against their control. It was too much. The signal wasn't just amplifying. It was reversing, warping back in on itself, creating a rift that threatened to tear apart the chamber. "No," Eleanor screamed, her voice drowned out by the deafening noise. Her body felt as though it were being ripped apart from the inside out. She fought to hold on to the amplifier's frequency, but the strain was too great. Behind her, she heard a voice, faint, distant. "Hale. Doctor, we need to stop it. We can't keep this up." But it was too late. The amplifier had become a conduit for something far more dangerous than they had ever anticipated. In their attempt to stop Holt, they had awoken something even darker, an ancient, unstable force that had been buried for millennia. Eleanor could feel the rift widening, pulling at the very fabric of space and time. The signal was no longer just a tool, it had become a weapon of unimaginable power. She saw flashes of destruction, cities crumbling, civilizations falling apart under the weight of the signal's chaotic influence. The amplifier was no longer a means to control, it was a harbinger of their own destruction. "Stop it," she cried, her voice barely a whisper. But the force was beyond her control now. It was consuming everything in its path, and she could only watch in horror as the chamber began to collapse around them. The last thing Eleanor saw before the darkness took over was the faces of the rogue symphonists, their expressions twisted in pain and terror. They had tried to harness the power, but now it was clear. There was no controlling the signal. The chamber was a crumbling shell, pieces of the once mighty amplifier strewn across the floor in jagged shards of metal and glass. The energy that had surged through the facility was now a silent, gnawing emptiness, leaving nothing but the remnants of the power that had almost torn the world apart. Eleanor's body was battered, her mind a haze of disjointed thoughts and fractured memories. She couldn't feel the signal anymore, not the overwhelming force that had once surged through her veins, not the chaotic hum that had threatened to destroy everything. The world outside had gone still. She was dimly aware of Hale's voice calling to her, distant and muffled, as if he were speaking from the depths of a storm. His arms were around her, pulling her upright, but she could barely focus on him. The rift, the collapsing walls, the scream of the amplifier, everything felt like a dream she was struggling to wake from. "Eleanor." Hale's voice was urgent now, closer, his hand shaking as they gripped her shoulders. "We need to move. The facility is coming down." She blinked, trying to shake off the fog in her mind. Slowly, the weight of what had happened began to settle in. The signal had gone haywire, twisting in on itself. But there was no explosion, no catastrophic end. Instead, the world had simply stopped. The walls had begun to buckle, the ground cracking beneath them, as if the very foundation of reality had been shaken. She stumbled to her feet, eyes darting around the decimated facility. The other symphonists lay scattered across the floor, some unconscious, others trembling in agony. Nadia was one of the few still conscious, her face pale, her hands pressed to her head, as if trying to hold her thoughts together. "What happened?" Eleanor rasped, her throat raw. Nadia's voice was faint. "The signal. It didn't just revert. It split. The amplifier was a conduit for something older, something we never understood. It took everything, every part of the signal, and fractured it." "Fractured it?" Eleanor asked, the weight of the words sinking in. Nadia nodded slowly. "It's like the signal has been severed. It's still there, but it's no longer unified. It's splintered. Different factions of it are scattered, uncontrolled. Some pieces might have even gone beyond Earth's atmosphere." Eleanor's heart sank. The amplifier, the device they had hoped would save humanity, had instead ripped the signal into pieces, scattering its power in unpredictable ways. The signal could still reshape the world, but now it was a force without direction, without order. It could be used to destroy or to transcend, depending on who found it first. "Where's Holt?" Hale asked, his voice tight with a mix of fear and urgency. "I don't know," Nadia answered. "We don't know if he survived, or if he was even in the facility when it collapsed. But if he's out there, he will find a way to harness the signal. The fragments might be scattered, but they'll still be powerful." Eleanor's mind raced. Holt had become more than just a leader of the symphonists. He had become a harbinger of their darkest impulses. If he found the pieces of the signal and reassembled them, there would be no stopping him. The world would fall under his rule, or worse, the fragments of the signal would empower the harbingers in ways humanity couldn't even imagine. "We need to stop him," Eleanor said, her voice firm again, the fog clearing. "We need to find Holt before he does. But we don't just fight with power anymore. We fight with knowledge." She turned to Hale. "We need to contact the other factions, the resistance groups, the ones still fighting Holt. They'll need to know what's happened here. They'll need to know that the signal is no longer something we can control." Hale nodded, his gaze steady, his face set in determination. "We'll get them organized. But where do we begin?" Eleanor glanced at the cracked sky outside, the swirling dark clouds overhead like a gathering storm. The harbingers had yet to make their move, but with the signal splintered, the balance had tipped. "The pieces are out there now," she murmured. "The fragments of a force that can remake or destroy everything. And someone, whether it's Holt or someone else, will be hunting them down." A distant rumble vibrated through the air. The harbingers had come to Earth long ago, but their silence had been just that, silence. Now, with the signal broken, they would surely be drawn to the fragments, to whatever remained of the power humanity had sought to control. And Eleanor knew that humanity's war was far from over. With a deep breath, Eleanor met Hale's gaze. The battle wasn't won, but they had survived. For now, the signal had turned on them.